Bill, is Kate going to be on?
Yeah, she should. Let me send her a quick text and see where she is. Oh, she just sent me an email saying, well,
good morning, everybody. Good morning. So this is Frank Sherman. I'm the Zoom administrator for today's meeting. If you look into the attendees panel, if you click on participants and look onto the attendees, I have a list of names who are panelists for today. But if you are seeing anyone who needs to come into the room, just let me know. For everyone else who is on the call, if you could send a message in the chat when it is time for your turn to participate in the meeting. Deb will let you know, I'm sure. But just use the raise your hand function, and I will allow you to talk or let you into the room depending on the circumstance. If there's anything else, if there's any technical questions, also feel free to use the chat. I'll be monitoring that the whole time. And with that, Deb, I will turn it over to you.
Deborah, you may want to let Kate in as a panelist, Kate Molinaro.
I'm here.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay, great. Frank, will Kate be allowed to share her screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Deborah Smith. I am the director for the Department of Economic and Community Development. I have with me Dave Dieter. There are other city staff on the line as well. Mayor Schimber's on, and I don't know if he'd like to say something, maybe welcome everybody to the meeting. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Deb. And I'm not going to take much time because I'm here to learn as well, but I do want to welcome everybody. Thanks for the participation. I look forward to moving forward with this. Thank you.
Right. So good morning again. Today we actually have our consultants, M&L, who will actually be giving us an overview of HOME-ARP funding that we have for the homeless. The City of Erie received $2.9 million, and this funding is for homeless providers, and they'll give you more information on that. So I'm going to actually turn it over to M&L, and I don't know if Bill Wasilewski, who is one of the consultants, and Kate Molinaro, who is the other. I'm not sure which one will speak first, but I'm turning it over to you guys. Thank you.
I'll turn it over to Kate. Again, it's Kate Molinaro and Bill Wasilewski from Mullen and Lonergan. I think how we're going to do this is Kate's going to do a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation on HOME-ARP, and then if you just reserve your questions, if any, till the end, that'd be helpful. And then we'll go from there. Kate?
Thank you. So as Bill said, we'll just go through an overview of what the American Rescue Plan home dollars are, what the city's application process will be like, who the qualifying populations are, and the eligible activities. They are a little bit different than the regular home program that some of you on the line might be used to. How the city will develop its HOME-ARP allocation plan, and the next steps that the city and its partners can start to take. So the Home American Rescue Plan is authorized by Section 3205 Homeless Assistance and Supportive Services Program, and it was passed early in 2021 and provides $5 billion of supplemental home assistance to individuals or households who are either homeless, at risk of homelessness, and then other populations that are vulnerable to losing their housing and require supportive service assistance, as well as potential shelter needs. The goal really of these dollars is to equitably reduce homelessness while increasing housing stability among the residents. I just want to note that these should not be confused with the regular, we'll call them American Rescue Plan dollars. So the city also got an allocation of other funding through the American Rescue Plan. They're probably more commonly known at the city level as ARPA. So these are a completely separate pot of dollars. And so I just wanted to make that clarification. As Deborah said, the HOME-ARP funds are allocated via the city's home formula. So the city gets an annual allocation of home dollars every year, and these funds were distributed according to the same formula. So because the city got funding in 2021, they also got this HOME-ARP allocation, and the dollar amounts were posted April 8th of 2021 on the HUD exchange, and you could see that website there. The city, as Deborah mentioned, will get $2,932,681 in HOME-ARP. And this is about, I think, 4.5 times the city's regular annual allocation, which is consistent with what other participating jurisdictions across the country received. So this is a lot of money to address the affordable housing issues as well as homelessness in the city. There are a couple of limitations on how much of the funds can be spent for certain things. So up to 15% of the dollars can be used for administrative and planning costs for the city and or its subrecipients. This is more than what would normally be available for administration under the regular home program. So the regular program allows up to 10%. HOME-ARP allows up to 15%. Up to 5% can be used to pay for operating costs for either CHODOs or other nonprofits that are undertaking HOME-ARP activities. So again, this is a little different than the regular program. Normally it's 5% for CHODO operating, and the HOME-ARP program expands that to other nonprofits that might be undergoing activities under the program. And finally, 5% for capacity building costs is expanded from CHODOs to other nonprofits as well. So if you've got a nonprofit entity that might be interested in developing a non-congregate shelter or providing additional supportive services for the qualifying populations, they would be eligible for up to 5% capacity building. So the application process really is boiled down to 3 steps, right? And so the first is HUD has provided the city with their initial grant agreement. And what this does is allow the city to access up to 5% of its administrative dollars before submitting their allocation plan. And so it's my understanding that the city has signed that agreement, has returned it. And so that 5% administrative funding is available to the city right now, and that can be used to help pay for some of the planning costs around developing the city's allocation plan. So the city then will develop this plan, submit it through IDIS, which is HUD's integrated disbursement system for tracking grants and activities in progress. And once the allocation plan is submitted and approved by HUD, that will release not only the remaining 10% of the administrative fund, but the rest of the $2.9 million that the city will have access to. And then the city will have until September 30th, 2030 to spend the dollars. So it's a long time to spend the money. And so, I think the city really wants to be thoughtful about how best to spend these dollars to address the needs that are identified during the development of the plan. I want to take some time to talk about the qualifying populations because they are a little different than what than the groups that would normally be eligible to receive home assistance. They're similar to the households and the individuals that would be eligible to receive ESG and or Continuum of Care dollars in the city. And so every household that would benefit from the investment of HOME-ARP dollars has to be a member of one of these qualifying populations. And so it's, we'll call them HUD homeless, right? So homeless is defined as in the Mckinney-Vento Act, at risk of homelessness as defined by Mckinney-Vento. Households or individuals fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. Other vulnerable populations defined under the Mckinney-Vento Act and then veterans and their families. And so let's really dive into what it means to be HUD homeless. And so this is an individual or a family who does not have a fixed nighttime residence, someone who might be living in a place not meant for human habitation, or a shelter that's designed to provide temporary living arrangements, someone who was residing in a shelter or another placement not meant for human habitation and is now exiting an institution. So this could be prison, a hospital, a rehabilitation facility, another inpatient treatment facility, or someone who will imminently lose their housing. And this includes housing that they own, rent, or housing that they might be sharing with someone else, as well as renting a room in a hotel or motel. Those are all considered places that a household might imminently lose their housing. At risk of homelessness means a little bit different. There's an income restriction to this. So someone who is at risk of homelessness has a household income at or below 30% of the area median income, lacks sufficient resources to attain housing stability, and one of the following four on this slide. So has moved several times because of economic uncertainty within the prior 60 days of their application. So usually it's several times within 60 days prior to application, they would be considered at risk of homelessness. If someone is doubled up and living in the home of someone else because of economic hardship, that would count as at risk, as long as they meet these other two criteria, which again is the income and lacking sufficient resources. If they're staying in a hotel or motel and the cost is not being paid for by a charitable organization, if they are considered overcrowding, so if there's more than one person living in a single room occupancy or efficiency, or if there's more than 1.5 persons per room in a unit, that's considered overcrowding. And again, if they're exiting an institution, a publicly funded institution, so a prison, hospital, an inpatient care facility, those would all contribute to factors of instability and being at risk of homelessness. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the eligible activities. Again, they are similar to what would normally be funded or be allowed with the regular home program, but there are a few additional activities and some expansions and flexibilities. So there are 5 eligible activities: the production or preservation of affordable housing, tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services, homeless prevention, and housing counseling, the purchase and or development of non-congregate shelter, and then, as we talked about earlier, nonprofit operating and capacity building. Non-congregate shelter generally includes an individual bedroom and bathroom, so not the SRO that you might be thinking of or used to thinking about when you're thinking about shelter. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but non-congregate shelter can also be converted to permanent housing if shelter capacity is no longer needed. But again, we'll talk a little bit about that. So to encourage communities to develop financially viable housing, the city could pay the entire amount of eligible costs associated with HOME-ARP funded rental units. And you can use the dollars to acquire, construct, and or rehabilitate rental housing for persons that meet one of the qualifying population definitions that we just talked about. And this could include single family housing, multifamily housing, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, a group home, SRO units, and manufactured housing. And so part of the process, and we'll talk a lot about this when we talk about developing the plan, but you're really encouraged, the city's encouraged to work with local public housing authorities, other agencies that might have additional subsidies that can help offset some of the expense to a qualifying population once they are placed in housing. HUD is also encouraging the inclusion of mixed income units. And so up to 30% of units funded with HOME-ARP can be for households that earn up to the low income limit, which is 80% of the area median income. So while generally most of the units need to be for those qualifying populations that are at 30% or below of the area median income, up to 30% of the units can be for populations that are up to 80%. Tenant-based rental assistance. So this is assistance that offers a subsidy. The tenant is required to pay 30% of their household income toward the rent, and then the subsidy can cover the rest of the rent. And it sticks with the tenant, not the unit. So if the tenant moves, the assistance goes with them to wherever they're living. Typically, the tenant-based rental assistance funded with home dollars is limited to 24 months. HUD has issued a waiver and an alternative requirement that would allow the city or the participating jurisdiction to determine the length of assistance. So it can extend beyond 2 years or 24 months, but all of the funds must be spent again by September of 2030. Supportive services is another eligible activity. The HOME-ARP dollars can be used to provide a variety of supportive services, including housing stabilization services that would be eligible under the McKinney-Vento supportive services definition. And that includes homeless prevention that you would provide under the ESG program as well. And we talked a little bit about housing counseling, and that's as defined in Part 5, and it must be performed by a HUD approved or HUD certified housing counselor and housing counseling agency. And I think it's important to note that these services can be provided to households that are not receiving services from another program. So they can be new to the supportive services continuum. And it can be a standalone activity, or it can be combined with other HOME-ARP activities. So for instance, if you're providing tenant-based rental assistance, you can also use HOME-ARP dollars to support that household with supportive services. And the same goes for qualifying populations that might be residing in rental units developed with HOME-ARP and or non-congregate shelter that's developed or rehabilitated with HOME-ARP. As I mentioned, non-congregate shelter is typically 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom per household. So not the SRO model where there's shared services. They're meant to be individual units, private units for the qualifying populations. The dollars can be used to acquire and or develop. So if an existing, say, hotel or a shelter that's maybe not operational already exists, the dollars can be used to purchase that and modify it to meet the needs of the non-congregate shelter requirements in the HOME-ARP guidelines. It's important to note that operating costs are not eligible under HOME-ARP. So if non-congregate shelter is determined to be a need in the community, other sources of funding would need to be identified to operate the shelter ongoing. And there are restricted use periods. So if you're building a new shelter, it's a 15-year restricted use. If you're rehabilitating, it's 10. If you're only acquiring and there's no need to modify it to meet the standards, it's a 10-year minimum use as well. You can convert a non-congregate shelter that you develop to rental housing, permanent rental housing. However, you must know this up front and you must detail it in the allocation plan. So if you know that your shelter is going to convert after the minimum use period, you you will need to identify that up front, because you'll need to identify funding sources to make sure that it's financially viable and feasible, as you would any other rental program or project developed with regular home dollars. And nonprofit operating capacity building, we talked a little bit about this initially. So up to 5% of the HOME-ARP allocation can be used to pay for operating expenses for CHODOs and other nonprofits that are going to be carrying out activities with the HOME-ARP dollars. An additional 5% can be used for capacity building. So this is for maybe new nonprofits that are not used to developing or providing supportive services, and the same with the CHODO. Operating expenses are things like salaries, wages, other employee compensation, training, travel costs, rent, and utilities of a building that the nonprofit or CHODO might be occupying. And then capacity building expenses include things, again, like salary for new hires, training costs, equipment to start up or expand production, and the provision of service. And there are limitations to what you can provide. So in any year, if you are getting both operating and capacity building, it's limited to 50% of the operating budget for the nonprofit, or $50,000, whichever is greater. So that's if you're getting one or the other. If you're getting just operating, it's 50% or 50,000. If you're getting just capacity building, it's 50% or 50,000. And then if you're getting both, that amount it's still 50%, but the max is $75,000. But you have to be getting both operating and capacity building to be eligible for that $75,000. So how do we start planning for the HOME-ARP and creating the allocation plan? The two key players will be the participating jurisdiction, which is the city as the recipient of the HOME-ARP dollars. And their responsibilities as a participating jurisdiction include managing the everyday administration of the program, making sure that the dollars are used in compliance with all of the regular program regulations, as well as the waivers and alternative requirements that HUD has implemented for this program. They're responsible for ensuring that the allocation plan is completed and submitted to HUD via IDIS. They'll execute the written agreements, create policy and procedure, and just everyday grant management activities, as well as making sure that they're monitoring any subrecipients or developers that receive dollars to make sure that if any performance correction need to happen, they can do that as early as possible. This also includes IDIS entry, financial management, making sure that projects are eligible, record keeping, and then annual performance reporting. The other key player in the city's implementation of the HOME-ARP dollars, will be the Continuum of Care. And the COC is the local planning body that's made up of all of the interested persons who are preventing and ending homelessness within this continuum's geographic region. They operate the homeless system from street outreach all the way through to placement and permanent housing. They typically administer the coordinated entry, which we'll talk about, and they provide crisis intervention and housing services for households experiencing homelessness. And so their roles and responsibilities in this process include their general responsibilities as a COC include making sure that the community's funding and services for people experiencing homelessness are coordinated. They submit the annual application, competitive application to HUD for the Continuum of Care Mckinney-Vento dollars. They coordinate all of the public and private funding sources. They create partnerships with your local housing providers and supportive services providers. And then they use the system's performance measures and data to improve their system and ensure that homelessness is kept to rare, brief, and non-recurring instances. So how can the COC be involved in the HOME-ARP? And so the city will have to work with the COC locally to identify the community priorities. They will be able to provide the data, as I said, to support the needs of the community, which is a required component of the HOME-ARP allocation plan to identify gaps in both units, services, and other types of products. The COC is a potential partner for some of the supportive services that might be provided as part of the HOME-ARP program. The COC can be an advocate for your project, or they can be an adversary. So I think it's important that you make sure that you're all communicating early on about the needs in the community. And as I said earlier, they operate the coordinated entry, which could be used for a source of referrals for persons, qualifying populations to occupy units or to receive assistance under the HOME-ARP program. And really, you know, by partnering with the Continuum, the city's really looking to leverage the relationships that the COC has with all of its partner organizations to make sure that the need is really identified, as well as they can really provide insight onto what the system's capacity is for whatever product it is the city chooses to propose to do with their HOME-ARP dollars. So what are the components of developing the HOME-ARP allocation plan? The first step is consultation. The second is to identify the HOME-ARP activities that the city will undertake. There's a public participation component. The plan includes a needs assessment and gap analysis, which is really what will drive what those activities will be. It will identify activity-specific requirements as necessary. And then there's a certification NSF 424, which is the city's formal application for the dollars. So part of the plan submission process includes a description of how the city consulted with particular agencies and service providers whose clientele include those qualifying populations. And so at a minimum, the city is required to consult with the COC, homeless and domestic violence providers, veterans groups, public housing authorities, other public agencies that address the needs of the qualifying populations, and then other public and private organizations that address fair housing, civil rights issues, and the needs of persons with disabilities. So these are the minimum that are required by HUD. Of course, if there are other stakeholders and entities within the community that would provide valuable feedback, these could be housing developers. It could be, you know, we've heard in some other communities, they're engaging with hospital systems and other healthcare providers to identify the needs of the qualifying populations. So that's sort of this first step in getting at what the needs of the city will be. And then there's a needs assessment and gap analysis. And as I mentioned, this will really drive the plan for the city. So the data must inform the decision of how the dollars will be spent. And so, you know, we'll take a look at some HMIS data, the point in time data, your system's performance measures, your existing inventory of housing for these populations, and really take a look at how well the system is or isn't meeting those needs and identifying what the gap is. And then the city will be able to come up with a plan for how to use HOME-ARP dollars to address those needs. And as I said, the data must drive that decision. So HUD will really be looking at what your needs assessment and your gap analysis identified, and then what you're proposing to fund with HOME-ARP dollars and how they align. The plan will also describe how the city plans to distribute its dollars according to those needs and the types of activities that the city is proposing to fund. And so if they're going to use their 5% for nonprofit capacity building, that should be outlined in the plan. And as I said, on the past slide, describing the shelter and the housing inventory, how the services are delivered, and how the needs assessment really informed the activities that the city has chosen to fund. The plan also needs to include a method for how the city will solicit applications for funding from developers, service providers, subrecipients, and contractors. And so that competitive process, if any, will need to be described in the allocation plan as well. The plan also must specify particular items associated with each activity. So for example, there must be an estimate of the number of units to be created. So for qualifying populations. So if one of the activities that's chosen is rental production of new units, the city needs to provide an estimate of how many units they will plan to produce and how that will meet the priority needs that were identified in that needs assessment and gap analysis. The city has the authority to identify preferences for units and for housing persons in TBRA, in the rental housing. They cannot include qualifying population. They can't include groups outside the qualifying population. So within the qualifying populations constraints, what will the city and what types of populations will the city prioritize and provide preference to, if any? You're not required to provide preferences. If you do, they need to be outlined in your plan. And then if the city intends to use any of the HOME-ARP dollars to refinance existing debt on a multifamily housing development in order to rehabilitate it up to certain standards or to non-congregate shelter, the refinancing guidelines must be included as part of the allocation plan. As I mentioned, there's a public participation component. So at a minimum, the city needs to provide the public with a reasonable notice and an opportunity to comment on the draft allocation plan, and it must be on display for a minimum of 15 days. The city has an existing citizen participation plan that it's adopted for the implementation of its HUD CPD programs, and that will be the guiding document for what constitutes reasonable notice and opportunity. However, if the 15 days is shorter than what the city's plan already outlines, the 15 days prevails. So the city can take advantage of the shortened time frame if it's shorter than what their current participation plan allows. And there must be at least one public hearing during the development of the allocation plan prior to it being submitted to HUD. As I mentioned, there's a certification and SF 424 process. The SF 424 form is the city's formal application to HUD for the dollars. It's a couple-page form that is submitted every year with the regular entitlement allocation, as well as the following certifications about affirmatively furthering fair housing, relocation assistance, anti-lobbying, authority of jurisdiction, Section 3. These first 5 are consistent with the certifications that the city submits annually to HUD. And then there'll be a HOME-ARP specific certification that commits the city to using HOME-ARP dollars consistent with the ARP and the notice for eligible activities. So what can you do now as a community? We can begin to collect data and identify what the community priorities for the dollars will be. And as I mentioned, there's HMIS data that the COC can provide on who is currently experiencing homelessness. We can look at data related to the system's performance measures and how many returns to homelessness there are, and those kinds of technical details about what homelessness looks like in your community. If there are existing community plans or gap analyses that have been conducted prior to the development, we can use those to inform a new gap analysis and needs assessment. Start to think about additional sources of funding for your project. So if you've got a project in mind that you know will require more than just what can be funded with HOME-ARP, or that might require ongoing operating or financing to make sure that it's viable through the minimum affordability periods, start to think about what those sources are, and then develop prioritization tools for potential projects. So if the need is going to far outweigh what the $2.9 million can do, really start to think about how you will prioritize the different types of projects that are eligible and the persons that you are most likely or able to serve. Questions, comments, all of the above.
Kate, there was a question in the Q&A. I don't know if you saw that yet. That might be a first.
No,
one.
I can't see what's.
It's asking whether the funds can be used to expand or renovate existing shelters so they can have non-congregate space for those vulnerable and or do not appropriate for shelter or for isolation needs.
Mm-hmm. It's my understanding that yes, they can, as long as there are certain property standards and condition standards that are beyond the general housing quality standards. So as long as the housing would meet the standards that are established in the program guidelines, it's my understanding that yes, you can expand and renovate an existing shelter to make it a non-congregate shelter.
I think there's a question from our City Council President, Liz Allen. She has her hand raised.
I do. Thank you, Debbie. I was wondering, who is the Continuum of Care organization in Erie? Is it the Erie Homes team? I just wondered, is that who the COC is? I don't know all the lingo. So. I'll defer
to Deborah, but I believe it is the home team.
It is the home team. What do we call it now? The homeless. Erie County Homeless. Dave. The home team. Yeah, the name was actually changed and was going to defer to Dave, yeah. But it is the home team. It's the Erie County Homeless Coalition, I believe.
Okay. And do other municipalities in Erie County, have they received HOME-ARP funding, or is it just City of Erie that got it?
Just the City of Erie. Since you're a home entitlement community, you're the only one that received it.
Okay. So you can't be somebody who had been living in the City of Erie, but would want to move to, say, Mill Creek or something, right? I mean, you would have to use it within the City of Erie, any type of, I'm just thinking back to the old days when, Mill Creek fought against mixed use housing and, that whole thing. That I'm not going to raise that, but I just was curious. So.
Yeah, I think people could come from anyone. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but the projects and the eligible activities have to be within the City of Erie.
Yeah, tenant-based rental assistance funded with the HOME program sometimes can be used outside the jurisdiction, but I think those are all things that if you are going to consider, they need to be outlined in your allocation plan. So it's similar to the housing authority, right? The housing authority will allow voucher holders to be outside of the city, but it's outlined in their plan to HUD. And so I think it's the same, it's the same kind of idea that you need to just outline if you're going to let people live outside of the city in an effort to deconcentrate poverty or, provide them more opportunity for, whatever the case may be, that all needs to be outlined in your allocation plan.
And I know there's other questions, so I don't want to monopolize. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for a really good presentation. It was very, very useful. And I just want to throw this other weird thing out there because we have a request for a repository sale where somebody wants to put trailers on empty lots in the city of Erie. First of all, I think that zoning isn't going to work that way anyhow. They aren't allowed to do that, but I'm wondering, I just am putting this out there. It's not really a question, but just kind of to alert you that there seemed to be someone at least who has what he perceives as a solution to affordable housing, or a very small solution. So I just wanted to alert, because one of the things we're trying to do with council is really improve communication. And the person who was proposing that did not come to the council meeting last week, but had submitted something saying he wanted to get these 2 lots and put trailers there for affordable housing. So that's just an alert for me. Thanks.
So there's there's several other questions that people raised. Can home funds support service funds to be used to hire nurses or shelter or other housing programs serving the public? So I don't know if it could do that, but you could provide what we call wraparound services that could include some of those things that they provide to help these households once they receive shelter or permanent supportive housing. Correct, Kate?
That's right. So the services that are eligible are defined in, let me see if I can go back to that slide here. Am I still sharing my screen, or did it stop?
No, you stop.
All right, let me find that. Let me find that slide and I will put that back up. And I'll just apologize in advance because I don't know off the top of my head the exact definition of all of these, but I don't know where my screen went. So it's services that are eligible under Mckinney-Vento supportive services. So this is adapted from what's in the current McKinney-Vento Act. It's also prevention services that are adapted from services that are eligible as stabilization services under the ESG, the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, and then housing counseling. So it's section 40129 of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So I believe healthcare services are included as part of that, if I remember correctly, but I apologize. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Yeah. And again, those are things that we can get into as we, as the city starts to prepare its plan. We can look at that, look at those requests, look at the data and the needs to help support that, as both, for the construction of new units as well as the provision of supportive services. Another question came in: if new permanent housing units for the homeless populations are built with a combination of regular home and HOME-ARP, are the normal home per unit cost limits applicable? Or are they considered separate sources of funding in regards? There is a cost limit, right, Kate? But I don't know if it's the home cost limits, right?
So the home per unit subsidy limits are not applicable to HOME-ARP, but if you would use regular home, they would be.
Correct.
So I think that's a disincentive to use regular home with HOME-ARP. And I think HUD's really encouraging communities to think about other funding sources besides the regular home, because of how different the qualifying populations are and some of these waivers and alternative requirements that apply to HOME-ARP, but that will not apply to home even when used in conjunction with HOME-ARP.
Correct. And then another question I see is: are you going to leverage your HOME-ARP funds with your home funds to support additional services to the homeless? And again, I think Kate just touched on that a little bit. The HOME-ARP, you're asking about the city ARP funds. I guess I'd have to defer to the city on that, if they're going to use city ARP funds in regard to their home funds, if I have that question correct. Again, the idea would be to leverage your our HOME-ARP dollars to create as many units as you can. I mean, 3 million is only going to go so far. It sounds like a lot, but it's only going to go so far. But I guess I would defer to Deb and the city regarding the if they're going to use their actual ARP dollars in addition to the HOME-ARP funds.
Well, actually, the city's taking applications for the ARPA funds. And I guess I'm just thinking, I'm not sure exactly like when this plan will be developed. I think we're looking more so toward the end of the years. And I would assume that, you know, there may be other projects that may be in place, but I'll defer that to the mayor or Renee Lamus to, you know, maybe answer that question.
I'll just say at this point, I don't think I understand this well enough to answer the question. So I still need, this is the first time learning about it. I'm very excited about it. This seems like a real opportunity to help our homeless. I know last year, over the course of the year, we had about 1,100 people, not all at once, but there were 1,100 homeless people in Erie, in that neighborhood throughout last year. So this seems like an opportunity to really turn that around, and I look forward to it.
I unmuted. I'm not on screen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Yeah, I'm just a participant. But yeah, the city's ARP funding has been obligated into several buckets related to economic and community development. There's about a $15 million bucket there's about $20 million for economic and community development, $15 million for that will be allocated to the redevelopment authority of the City of Erie, which will be focusing on housing related issues, first-time home buyer, housing rehab. So there may be some synergies there. And then there's also a lot of funding that's being used for infrastructure and for increased public safety, which will also potentially be another area where there could be some collaboration. We've been meeting with some of the other human service agencies and with the county regarding homelessness issues that have been exacerbated since COVID-19, and determining strategies that we can employ moving forward. And one of those things that the city has decided to do is to reinstitute the crisis car, which will help mitigate a lot of these issues, working with homelessness, those with mental and behavioral health issues, addictions, domestic violence, those kinds of things. So I also see some synergies there. But I think as Deb mentioned, as we get this data together and we look at the gap analysis, this will help us to determine what services are missing, where we're not meeting the need. And then we can determine the best way to use the HOME-ARP funds and see if we have funding that we can leverage with the city's ARP funds. So nothing's been completely determined yet. The study will bear all this out, and I look forward to all this unfolding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
I think there's another question that came in related to, can you share who the public participation identifies when allocating funds to be considered? So again, public participation will be a broad outreach effort focusing, I think, on Kate's slide that reflected a lot of the homeless shelters. There can be stakeholder meetings. That is pretty flexible in terms of how the city determines what that public participation looks like. I can envision stakeholder meetings. Again, the things Kate listed in her slideshow are just the minimum. But again, that's can be a discussion item, and it can be it should be incorporated into a detailed stakeholder review process within key players in the homeless and community development perspective within the city, and potentially even some potential county agencies that would serve homelessness to inform this. Then there's this next question: are you going to reach out to the county as well, to see how they are using their ARPA funds and possibly leverage funds? We still are in the planning phases, but there has been talk about putting some of the ARPA funds to housing development, shelter expansion, and renovation. But as just was mentioned, the money only goes so far. Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I mean, I think certainly there's an opportunity to consult and coordinate with the county because, you know, in these communities that are just outside the city, their needs impact the needs of the city, certainly. So I think there's absolutely an opportunity to partner. Does the county, I don't know that the county is a participating jurisdiction. Do they get money directly from
They
HUD
do.
for home?
They do not.
So they would be competing for HOME-ARP dollars at the state level through DCED and or PHFA, however they decide to implement those. But as far as counting ARPA dollars, I think there's certainly an opportunity to partner, but I would defer to the city on that.
Kate, I guess a lot of that will depend on what the gaps are and how the plan is actually kind of developed. If it looks like, you know, we should be collaborating with the county, we will definitely do that. But I think a lot of it will depend on how this plan, you know, develops.
I would agree. And again, you know, there's a whole opportunity, going back to the stakeholder question, even to kind of involve both for-profit and not-for-profit developers. Again, they of affordable housing as they, move to get tax credits for projects within the city. I know the city has a very active tax credit development community. Potentially partnering with those folks to actually use these dollars to help create additional permanent supportive housing units within the city. But again, these are all part of working through the stakeholder process, the data analysis, and then ultimately for selecting eligible activities and for qualifying populations and how the city plans on going about that. But obviously, it's another avenue for use to do expansion or leveraging other funding sources to create additional units to address the needs. I believe we answered all of the questions that were posted in the chat boxes. Are there any other questions or comments? If there's no more questions, Deborah, I guess I could provide just a kind of next steps kind of thing, as well as a general timeline. Would that be helpful?
Yep, that will be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Again, the city has to prepare this allocation plan. I think the general idea would be for the city to work through getting that plan and stakeholder outreach and data analysis done here hopefully within the next 3 to 5 months. The goal is to have the full allocation plan completed and submitted to HUD for their review and approval before the end of the year. Again, just the amount of activities that have to be done from a stakeholder participation standpoint, looking at qualifying allocations and the data analysis is going to take time, and the stakeholder input obviously is going to take time, and then identifying projects. I have to say that this is really a mixture of homelessness and development focused funds. So you really have to put your developer's hat on as part of this process to see how many units you're going to be able to create with these dollars and identify potential projects. So that may take a little bit of time. And again, the city has until 2030 to spend these dollars. So that's not a bad thing to kind of think about these sources from a higher level, and then also from a development perspective, so that you're getting the most bang out of these dollars, as well as providing the correct support services that meet identified needs within the community. Assuming that the city gets an approved HUD allocation plan sometime early next year, that would allow the city then to begin implementing their plan. So I don't know if you all have anything to add to that on the city side.
No, we just look forward to the next steps and involving everyone on the call, as well as the homeless committee to develop this plan. And we just look forward to working with everyone. That's all.
Okay. Someone just asked about a website. I'm not sure what that's about.
I'm not sure if they're asking about the City of Erie's ARPA funds. But Renee did provide that information in the chat.
Okay. Great. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I guess we can adjourn this meeting, and I thank everybody for their time today, especially folks from the city council and the mayor and all the others that have participated, and please stay tuned as we move forward with this important program.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks.